that global energy policy had had a landmark impact on Kurdistan and its aspiration for independence, as it was subjected to varying degree of policies by different global powers, old and new, and thus there has been no unique policy toward oil resources in Kurdistan. Therefore, energy policy in Kurdistan region has a unique international dimension and has a great bearing on water, food, energy nexus in Kurdistan region. Kurdistan region, which is situated in arid and semi-arid region with semi-Mediterranean climate, is part of the greater Tigris River, as shown by the last presenter. The annual water resources potential for the Kurdistan region amounts to about 30 billion cubic meters. Per capita water availability is more than 7,000 meters squared per person per year, and the water stress condition is defined as 700 meters squared per capita per year. However, this does not show water stress or water scarcity at local levels. Water shortages are experienced in Kurdistan, in different parts of the Kurdistan region. Water shortages are experienced in Kurdistan region. However, a great deal of Kurdistan region's water resources originate from Turkey and Iran, and overall surface water dependency ratio is about 45%, which indicate a high level of potential tensions and conflict. Climatic variability and change is a big factor to be considered. The region has experienced both droughts and water shortages in the past, as in 1999 to 2001, and repeated in 2008. One of the major challenges has been to estimate the annual discharge of River Tigris due to largely yearly fluctuation. Such variation in annual discharge poses a great difficulty in developing an adequate water allocation plan and competing water demand from each sector, as well as ensuring the fair sharing of water among neighboring countries. The uncertainty about potential water resources has been aggravated by water development plans in the neighboring countries, as shown by the last presenter. Kurdistan region, on the other hand, has embarked on massive water resources development plan, as a total of 13 dams are under construction, of which 4 are large dams, and total of 40 dams are planned. The goal is to achieve both water and food security in Kurdistan region. However, water development in Kurdistan region lacks an integrated and holistic approach and marred by data and knowledge uncertainty. Most importantly, a clear vision and an integrated management approach are needed to assess the viability of the development plan in Kurdistan. The legacy of Iraq's modern water and land resources development of irrigated agriculture is still looming in Kurdistan region. The same attitude and appetite for more irrigated land exists among Kurdish policymakers. The Kurdistan region was once considered to be the breadbasket of Iraq due to the presence of fertile and arable lands and vast amount of water resources. However, agricultural sector remains to be less productive, partially due to wars and political and military conditions. Over 4,000 villages were destroyed during the Saddam era. From the onset, food self-sufficiency was a major policy for the KRG. Agricultural development plan was envisaged. However, this plan doomed to failure, and much of the foodstuff is imported from Turkey and Iran. There were 3 main factors influencing this trend. United Nations Oil for Food program has damaged or killed the agricultural sector in Kurdistan. Secondly, the great rate of urbanization and expansion of real estate, tourism and service sector. Over 800 hotels have been built in these 3 cities. Expansion and development of lucrative oil sector. Kurdistan region has increased its oil production to 250,000 barrels per day. KRG is increasingly becoming a rentier state and indeed rely upon oil revenues for its economic and social development plan. This has caused an ease in Baghdad and the state of Iraq. Thus, energy policy have a great bearing on agricultural sector. Agriculture takes second place to oil in terms of KRG's policy for development. Food security and self-sufficiency is not only difficult to achieve, but it is rather impossible. Global forces determine food pricing, and homegrown produce might not be economic with traditional agriculture, which is unproductive and wasteful. The politics of irrigation remains central to KRG's effort and aspiration for food security. KRG is attempting to increase agricultural output, to increase food security, and indeed avert major health concern about the increase of cancer-related diseases which are attributed to past military campaigns in the region and imported food. KRG's new agricultural policy is based on facilitating support for Kurdish farmers and increasing production by the use of new methods and technology, such as the improvement of farm equipment and the introduction of transport subsidy. The structural responses are not enough. New laws and legislation might be necessary to reform the agricultural sector. Agrarian reforms in Iraq date back to 1930s, and legal approach has been strengthened in recent years. However, non-structural legislative responses lack a strong capacity development initiative. New policies and laws in water, agriculture, and energy sector should be streamlined. Thus, water, food, energy nexus cannot be achieved if sectoral approach continues. Contradiction and discrepancies within the legal approach will be detrimental to the process of development in Kurdistan.
Okay, and your time is up. I'll give you 1 minute to wrap up.
I would say that the same mistake which has happened in Iraq and elsewhere should not be repeated in Kurdistan. The land and water resources in Kurdistan lacks river basin planning and development. A drive for hydropower protection without consideration of drinking and agricultural sector is strong. Irrigation network plans are lagging behind and non-existent. There is lack of care for environmental consideration. There is lack of consideration for climatic variability. And the last thing I ask, that the Kurdistan regional government should reassess its land and water policy based on holistic and sustainability approach by putting greater emphasis on environmental impact of their development plans. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent, thank you. Our next speaker will be Mr. Andrea Cattarossi. Andrea, you have worked in Iraq on water issues for over 10 years on projects up and down the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. You are now currently working with the Ministry of Water Resources in Baghdad on a strategy for the management of land and water resources for Iraq, including Kurdistan, for the next 20 years. So I'd like you to say a bit about this strategy and briefly tell us, what does the future of Iraq in water look like?
Thank you. Thank you, Virginia. I hope that you can hear me. First of all, sorry, my voice is a little down. But thank you all for being here and for this opportunity. So first of all, maybe I should tell something about Swillery. I guess that's the question. And this is a terrible acronym for a project that is a strategy for water and land resources management for the next 20 years for Iraq. This is a project that has been wanted very strongly by the Minister of Water Resources and by the government of Iraq. And it will provide a plan for how to spend, invest money in the water sector for the next 20 years. And it is for the entire country, not just for Baghdad, but also for KRG, for the Kurdistan region. Now, Swillery has taken a lot of work. is the work and the effort of more than 100 people working for several years. And now it's finally nearly over. Sweetly provides a great opportunity. One of the many, it is about information. Now, over time, over my experience in working with the ministry and the many meetings that I have been in, the great question was always, but can I trust this information? Is it true that Iraq is getting so much water from Turkey? Or what is the water quality that Iraq has available? So these are great questions, and of course, the problem is that there are many, many numbers, many informations out there. Sweetly has spent a great deal of effort in trying to prove and verify and validate basic information, such as how much water Iraq is getting, how much water is flowing through Iraq, what is the quality of the water is coming in, what is going to happen in the future, in the present. Now, this is obviously not just important because if these informations are true and valid, gives credibility to the plan we are proposing. But it's because also informations and trusting such information is building trust among the very countries that are called to negotiate about water. So if I trust the information, then maybe I trust that whatever I'm suggesting is true. So this is a first step, I guess, in creating cooperation among the countries that are working on the water here. So this is a wealth of information, a wealth that Iraq now has available. I'll give you an example of what happened to me personally. A few months ago, no more than a few months ago, I was in Erbil discussing with the Minister of Water in Baghdad, the Minister of Water in Kurdistan, about the development of the Greater Azzam, the big dams that are planned for the last undammed river you have in Iraq. Now, KRG, the Kurdistan region, has developed a plan for developments that is based on old information. And so one of the purposes of my meeting with the ministry here was to tell them that whatever you have, whatever you're using for basing your plans, it's old. Now, we spent millions of dollars and many, many months, many, many years and efforts in preparing better information. Now, the problem, if we continue following this path, it's serious. Of course, there are so many dams around the world that have been built that are for nothing, are being run empty. They never pay themselves back. And this is a problem, of course. So one thing I would like to say here is that even without looking outside Iraq, there is a need for coordination inside Iraq. And this is a first example. Now, this issue, it's a simple one. Of course, there is just a little bit of lack of coordination between two ministries, the one in Baghdad and the one in Erbil. The solution is simple. Just sharing information, just making sure that everything is accessible. And the blame or the fault, if there is, it goes both ways. It's not like the fault of Erbil or the fault of Baghdad. It's both ways. So what are the challenges, really? I would like to say, you know, Mr. Monadel has been presenting issues outside Iraq, how much water we're getting and what's going to be the future. Now, that's one side of the problem. The other real side of the problem I've been looking at, it is what's happening in Iraq. The fault is not all of the neighboring countries. Iraq has something that has to be working very seriously. And indeed, this country has taken seriously the water issue during the last several years. I've seen a lot of efforts, new irrigation projects being developed with modern technology, efforts in studying and understanding better what's going on. Sweetly is the perfect example. I mean, Sweetly is probably the most challenging and most serious effort that this government is implementing in planning, in showing the other countries that the water issue is being taken very seriously. And this is obvious. Why? What it comes out of very simple information being shared, it is that if the water issue is not taken seriously, Iraq has no more than 7 to 10 years before it runs out of fresh water. I mean, whatever is your need for water will not be met in the next 7 to 10 years if you don't take things seriously. Luckily, you are. And so here is other problems, like you've heard. UN recent studies are showing that Iraq is losing agricultural land at an incredible rate. 2% of the agricultural land is lost every year to the desert. This is incredible. So needs for actions are required. Iraq has about 70,000 square kilometers of arable land, of land available for agriculture. And today, nearly 77% of this land, so a good proportion of this, is being cultivated. The problem is that not even half of this land is being organized and maintained and managed by the government. So water losses are very, very large. We believe the numbers or not, but the problem is that of whatever water, which is more than 80% of the water you're receiving in Iraq and you have in Iraq, is going to agriculture. 70% of that water is lost, never gets to the target, 70%. So it's a huge amount of water. So where are the challenges and what are the proposals that we are making in this plan, in this investment plan? Some are incredible shift over historical ways of investing money and managing water. I'll name few. For the many past year, Iraq has invested a lot of money, a lot of effort in building dams. Now, this is no longer, it's proven, no longer is the way ahead of you. This is not anymore the way that you should invest your money. The money should be invested in modernizing agriculture. This has now been proven. It's many, many folds. Your return of your investments are going to be better off put it into agriculture and modernizations of that than in new dams. There are shifts also in the way you manage the water. For those of you that understand and know Iraq, the Tartar Lake, this is the largest lake you have in Iraq, no longer will be used for storing water, for managing water for agriculture in the future. There is no water to fill this lake in the future. This is an incredible shift over the last 30, 40 years of planning and managing. I'll name a few more. Now, Iraq is an oil-rich country, and to extract oil in Iraq, you need to re-inject water into the oil fields. This is not little water you need. It comes to 3–5% of your entire water that you need to re-inject to extract oil. Now, in Tuileries, to make sure that you understand how seriously the government is taking these steps in trying to save water, we are trying to understand if most of this water can be taken not from the water bodies of the rivers, but from the sea and from the drains, so to use alternative sources. This is a great investment that you need to do. The common seawater facility that all these oil companies are building in the south cost billions of dollars to be built. And it's a must, but it's not enough. So another important steps, probably the key important steps that this strategy is putting forth, it's something that maybe neighboring countries will be interested in understanding. Iraq does not have a plan to develop new land. The plan, serious, is to actually modernize and fix the existing land. The 77% I told you before, this is a lot of land, many of which needs to be modernized. This is a huge investment. Modernizing agriculture is not cheap. What you used to spend today, now you need to spend more than 3 times as much to actually go from traditional agriculture to modern agriculture. This is a lot of money, but it's a must. You cannot escape that. Now, of course, it all seems simple. But unfortunately, because also there are water reductions from neighboring countries, the problem is not only with Iraq. We have to compromise to achieve the goals of 2035 of development for the country. We have to compromise. And unfortunately, some of the compromises come to great expenses to the environment. This is a problem.
And I'm sorry, Andrea, I'm just going to give you 1 minute to wrap up.
Right, okay. And so where are the problems? The problem is that you will not be able probably to develop 100% of your marshes in the south, which is so critically important. Other issues are with maintaining water quality standards, acceptable water quality standards all throughout Iraq. Now, for those of you that sees and knows about Basra, that's a perfect example of what's going to happen if you cannot maintain water quality. And you cannot if you cannot negotiate with the neighboring countries. So that's my bottom line. My bottom line really is that Iraq is seriously taking into considerations what to do with the water problems. It's not avoiding the problem, has a serious plan for that. But it cannot do it alone. The problem is not, definitely is in Iraq, but definitely needs help and cooperation with neighboring countries. It's not asking much, but time is the essence, and coordination is utmost important. So that's what I would like to say.
Excellent, thank you. Lost my thing here. Excellent, thank you so much, Andrea. Next on our panel will be Dr. Azzam Alwash. Ooh, my timer's going off. See, I'm serious about keeping time.
You're a tough moderator.
And it's not letting me clue. So next on the panel is Dr. Azzam Alwash, the founder and president of Nature Iraq. Azzam, you are known for your tremendous environmental work in Iraq, particularly your work in helping save the Mesopotamian marshlands of southern Iraq, and also bringing worldwide attention to these issues. You were also recognized in 2013 by Foreign Policy magazine as one of the 100 global leading thinkers. And so, as a global leading thinker, what do you think? We've heard anyone who, unfortunately, Mr. Monadel got cut off, but this is a decades-long debate over water sharing of the Tigris and Euphrates. These have been ongoing negotiations, that there's never been a solution and a robust agreement on this. It's complicated. There are the water, energy, security, food nexus, as Mukhtar talked about. Iraq can't do it alone, as Andrea talked about. So what are your ideas on how to move forward on this issue?
Thanks, Virginia. I'm going to change plans here. We're going to wing it. Yesterday and today, we heard a lot about what divides us. Turks, Arabs, Kurds, Shia, Sunni. I think we have an opportunity to use water as something that unites us. And before I start, I want you to all imagine the map of Iraq in your head and think about what southern Iraq is. Geology teaches us that southern Iraq is a sedimentary plain. Think about that expression. The soil of southern Iraq starts its journey in the mountains of Kurdistan, larger Kurdistan. It's carried by the water of the Tigris and Euphrates down to southern Iraq where it's sedimented. The ecology, the geology, the biology connects us. It precedes humanity. It precedes Kurds, Arabs. We are united by the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates and by the soils of Kurdistan. In fact, if we are what we eat, we're all Kurds, but that's a side story. In fact, actually thinking about that, we're all probably global citizens since the majority of the stuff that we eat here today is probably produced somewhere else. That is something that I want my Arab friends, where I grew up in southern Iraq, you heard the marshes. Most of you have not seen the marshes. I grew up on the marshes. It's an incredible water world. It is, in fact, the birthplace of civilizations, ladies and gentlemen. It is where writing was invented, by the way, as an instrument to keep track of debts. So the original Sumerians were bankers, apparently. It is where the wheel was invented. It's where Abraham was born. And so, again, we're connected. There's an underlying geology, biology, ecology, and then overlaid with this human connectivity. And this is not just for Iraq. Of course, there's Iran, there's Syria, there's Kurdistan. So, Iraq is where agriculture was developed. Well, the Sumerian method of agriculture lasted 7,000, 8,000 years because, in fact, the floods that come in just about now, every year, the floods bring in the water and bring with it the soil. And what the floods do, of course, they destroy cities, but what they do is actually renew the farmland, the vitality of the farmlands of southern Iraq. They wash away the sabkha, the salt that is generated from the irrigation method, the Sumerian irrigation method, but more importantly, it deposits a new layer of silt and clay every year. The Iraqi farmer, the Sumerian farmer, the Babylonian farmer did not need fertilization. There was a natural fertilization by the flood cycle. Well, of course, that also developed the Sumerian method of irrigation, which has no value for the water. I think Mukhtar talked about that, and Andrea talked about that a little bit. And so the culture of the farming in this region has not caught up with the new reality of the dams. By the way, I think we're going to start a new movement called Dam the Dam movement. I will take applications. And it's interesting what Andrea said, that dams don't make any more economical sense. You know, they're viewed as the renewable source, and I'm going sideways, but let me go back to the irrigation. 50% of the water of Iraq is being lost. Well, there's an opportunity, guys. Instead of burning the gas down in the south, and I don't know how many of you have gone down to the south, I go to the south quite a lot, and we burn something like $100 million worth of gas every day. Well, how about converting that gas into plastic pipes? And Iraqi government, why don't you invest $2 billion, build a petrochemical plant, and convert that gas that you're wasting into plastic pipes? And you know what? Not only give it to the Iraqi farmer for free, but give it to the Syrian farmer, the Turkish farmer, the Iranian farmer, not because we love them, but because we love ourselves. Here is the problem. All the farmers in the region are using the Sumerian method of irrigation, which, in fact, what's happening is that there is a lot of drainage water that is salty, that's full of pesticides, that's full of nutrients, and it's fed back into the river. So, consequently, the farmer in Basra is literally dealing with this drainage of the entire basin. So, government of Baghdad, please help modernize irrigation, not only in Iraq, but modernize irrigation in Turkey and Iran, not because you love them, again, because you love your Iraqi farmer. Drip irrigation, if we say 50%, there's no war, there's no problem. It's easy, of course, in theory. How do you apply it? Mr. Zibari. There are other methods. There are others. I mean, okay, Turkey is building the GAP project. They say they want energy. Fabulous. Well, when you transport electricity from the mountains of Kurdistan all the way to Istanbul where you need it, you're losing 20, 30%. Why don't we buy this electricity to Iraq? There's going to be a loss on there, 5, 10%. All right? So there's more income to Turkey. And you know what? We'll buy it with gas that they can transport all the way to Istanbul and generate electricity closer to Istanbul where they need it. What did that do? That basically created water for Iraq, because for Turkey to generate electricity, it has to pass the water through the hydroelectric turbines, and that brings water as a byproduct. Notice, we did not buy water for petroleum. We bought electricity for petroleum. We changed the dialogue from whose water this is, or in fact, no parliament in Iraq is ever going to approve a treaty where we're buying water for petroleum. But we can definitely buy electricity. We bypassed the step of whose water this is, and we created connectivity by trade. But more importantly, we will begin the process of building the pieces. Now, other ideas are available. Instead of repairing Mosul Dam, and you're not going to like this, but instead of repairing Mosul Dam and spend $3 billion on an experiment that I know will fail, but it's your money, why don't we decommission Mosul Dam and use that money to store water in Turkey? Evaporation losses will make up for the difference. I can calculate it for you. We have scientists. But we can. The idea here is we need to start thinking outside the box. There are these ideas. I know people are going to be laughing here, but I'll remind you, 10 years ago when I was talking about restoring the marshes, people were also laughing. Guess what? I'm having the last laugh. how much more time do I have?
3-4 minutes, maybe.
All right, great. And so instead of spending $3 billion on an experiment, let's cooperate with Turkey on storing Iraqi water there, or the water that's going to come to us, store it there. You can make the difference in evaporation losses. There are other ideas that we can work on. The problem is the trust that Andrea was talking about. How do you reach an agreement with Turkey and Iraq and Iran? There is no trust. So we need to create economic models that the scientists in Turkey, the scientists in Iraq can trust, so that policymakers, when it comes time to negotiation, can have the tools that are verified by both sides, by scientists from both sides, that this is in fact represents reality, and that you can use to reach agreements. This is our role here in the American University. And this is where I want to go next with the American University, with the Twin Rivers Institute, with the Blue Crescent Initiative. We need to create connective tissue between academics in Iran, in Syria, in Iraq, and Turkey to work together on economic models that can be used to evaluate these crazy ideas. And there are other ideas. I mean, if you can give me, say, 20 minutes, I can expound. But the point is, we need to change the dialogue in the region from whose, and I'll close with that, from whose water this is to how can we cooperate. If there is a political will, there is a way. We can come up with ideas that increase trade. And think about it. Trade can potentially lead to a borderless Middle East. Okay, laugh, but let's think about it. How many of you have gone to Ibrahim al-Khalil and seen the trucks, 10 kilometers of trucks, 5 abreast, waiting for 2-3 weeks? This is money. This is costing the Iraqi consumer money. If we can increase the trade, somehow go to Turkey and negotiate with Turkey, not only on water, but on trade and energy and all other stuff. And by the way, on a side issue, the foreign minister yesterday was speaking about the same things. So it's like, I thought that the hardest sell is going to be in Ankara. Guess what? The hardest sell is going to be in Baghdad. But that's the idea here. If we can go to Turkey and negotiate on water only, we're going to lose. We're not going to be able to win. But if we go to Turkey and negotiate on water, electricity, energy, trade, there's a good chance that we can come up with a friendship treaty that regulates everything. The point is we need to increase trade. And with increased trade, there is going to be less tension. In fact, we could possibly create a common market. A blue crescent market, a green crescent market. It happened in 1957 in Europe after 2 world wars that they created a common market. What? All of a sudden the British fell in love with German cuisine? Hey, it's economy, but in the eternal words of the eternal Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. I think the economy and unifying trade and increasing trade in the region is going to eventually lead to solving the water issues, the trade issues, the Kurdish problem maybe. Maybe we can live all together in peace by using water and trade as a way to the future. And I'll thank you.
Great, thank you. So now that Dr. Azzam has solved the world's problems, let's take a few questions. I have a few of my own, and then we'll open it up. Sorry if you can just be patient. First, I'd like to give Mr. Monadel, I know you got cut off, so I would like you very quickly to talk about some of the main issues of why an agreement thus far has not been reached between Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. What were some of the main holdups, the main problems?
Yes, the main points of difference between Iraq and Syria from one side and Turkey,
yes,
another side. Turkey consider Euphrates and Tigris basins as one basin, single basin, while Iraq and Syria consider Tigris independent from Euphrates basin due to the fact that there is natural boundaries and geographical boundary between 2 basins.
Okay.
Another point is that thousands of years inhabitants of the Mesopotamians developed the irrigation system in Iraq. And this create a acquired right to Iraq, vested right to Iraq to use the water. Turkey refused this concept. Another thing, Turkey did not consider the Euphrates and Tigris as international rivers. They consider it as a transboundary rivers, and therefore Turkey refused to consider the water crossing the boundary as a share water. I want to say here that according to the report of 1993 years of International Law Commission, which is United Nations organization, they state that there is no substantial difference between the term of transboundary rivers and the term of international watercourse. Hence, no difference legal effect due to the use of this expression. So it's just matter of terminology. So this is the main point which difference between during negotiation.
Right.
But I want just to say that if before 1960, the use of water by Turkey is only 2%, and Syria only 10%. And Iraq used at that time 60% of the mean annual inflow of the Euphrates. And if GAP implemented in Turkey and Syria implement its plan for development, then Iraq will receive only 25% of the Euphrates inflow. And this is very associated with bad quality because most of this inflow is backwater inflow, backwater from irrigation inflow of Syrians and Turks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah.
Can I follow up on Monadel? What you heard is, okay, this is our right. This is our historic right. It's our international right. That's what I heard. It reminds me of the Palestinian problem, or even the Kurdish problem. Right? International law is great, but it only applied on the weak. In this case, Iraq is the weak. So we can continue demanding our international right and die in the process. Or we can compromise. I literally heard once the deputy minister of water resources, Ali Farhan, stand up and say, Iraq needs 98 billion cubic meters of water. I mean, come on, give me a break. Okay, it's a negotiation position, fine, I understand. But guys, there's an American, I mean, okay, so Mexico won 2 cases against the United States for the Colorado River, right? Guess what? They still haven't gotten a drop of water into the Gulf of Mexico. Who's the strong in this case? It's America. All right, who's the strong in this case? It's NATO. Turkey is NATO. You want to go on another war? No thanks. Right? So what do? You complain, you stand up. I mean, let's move a little bit. Okay, fine. I'm not saying don't demand. Demand it, but come up with ideas that can bypass this question. Let's stop talking about whose water this is, and let's find ways to compromise. Let's find ways to reach a solution. All right, demand it, great. But come up with ideas that can solve the problem and move the ball forward.
Okay, with that, I think, Mukhtar, you'd like to?
I'd like to add that really the looming crisis, both water and energy.
I'm sorry, can you speak up just a bit?
Looming water crisis.
Okay.
It cannot be solved by bilateral agreement. There should be a regional planning. And of course, we need mechanisms for that. We need an institutional design and administratively, and the 4 countries should come together. So they should do their planning together. I think that is the essence. But the other thing is that at the moment, the UNDP had initiated in 2008.
I can't hear you, sorry.
Why everybody can't hear me?
Very soft-spoken. Maybe I'm just loud.
I have got some sore throat. I do apologize. I don't want to shout. But what I'm saying, the bilateral agreements cannot solve the problem.
Sure.
We need regional planning.
Yes.
So a development plan, a regional development plan, but that needs mechanism. The four countries should come together and set up an institution to deal with this matter independently, negotiated. The Nile Basin Initiative, for example, was initiated for the 10 riparian countries for the Nile Basin. So we need to do something similar for Euphrates and Tigris River here. The other thing is that following Andrea's call for more agricultural modernization, and this happened in Iran, it means more water use. We need water demand management. We don't need expansion of existing agricultural sector. And the other thing that was postulated by Azzam in a very romantic way is actually is happening. Virtual water trading. I mean, we import water by buying foods from other countries. So if we include virtual water trading in our development plans, then the politicians are not sensitive about food self-sufficiency and the flagship policies, which doesn't work, and indeed leads to this massive developmental work, which is waste of money and waste of natural resources.
Okay.
So really, we need to emphasize the collaboration between the four countries in a legal approach, an institutional design that deal with the new realities.
Okay. And sorry, Mr. Monadel, I'd like to give Andrea an opportunity to respond briefly, and then we'll move on to you.
Okay. Well, first I guess to the point of creating an institution, creating a regional process. Of course, this is definitely where we should go. But honestly, we also need to realize that there is a reality right now that we cannot avoid. So it's difficult talks, it's difficult plans. In the process, ultimately, there must be some sort of regional cooperation, coordinations, well planned, all together. But in the meantime, there are, of course, situations like Syria now. It's difficult to talk when a country is under basically such a disrepair. But there are opportunities. Iraq now is talking well with Iran, and in ways that it couldn't do before, and with Turkey. And so I guess that in the meantime, this process has to be taken whatever is the opportunity. So my point is, yes, we need to aim at a regional coordination and cooperation all together, a Tigris Euphrates basin management, but in the meanwhile, that sounds a little complicated. I also would like to say maybe a statement about using water for agriculture in the future. I mean, in the plan, and this is in the plan for Iraq, the expansion, so there is no expansions of agriculture in terms of new land being cultivated, but definitely there is a cultivation of existing land in a more efficient way. Iraq, unfortunately, will have less water for agriculture. Today, more or less 40 billion, 80% of what is available today goes into irrigation. In the future, only 30 will go. So with much less water, we can cultivate the same amount of land. This is because we need to apply modern irrigations, more efficient. That's definitely the major challenge for a country that needs legal and institutional changes.
But it will also reduce drainage, Andrea. It will also reduce drainage.
So the farmers control how much water they use, and if they have more water, they cultivate more lands, and they can buy or rent extra. I mean, this is from our experience in Iran and the rest of the world. If you don't have demand management, if you just like to use modernization of your agricultural sector, you'll use more water and more land will be developed.
Okay, and real quick, just, and then I'd like to open it up.
I just want to comment on Mr. Azzam.
I love you too.
I just want to say that the sovereignty of the upstream countries, upstream riparian countries, on the water is not absolute. According to the international law, it's limited. That's not causing harm to the downstream.
Wallahi, I understand.
Excuse me. And this, it's not like a land. They have the sovereignty on the land, okay, but on the water, because it's moving element, so it may cause harm for the riparian, for the downstream countries. So in this case, I understand you that because they are strong and they are upstream, they can do anything. No. According to international law, their sovereignty is limited, not absolute. That's all.
Okay, great. Well, let's try to open it up to some questions. Dr. Sarba, if you'd like to speak first. And is there a microphone for her? A microphone here, please.
Good morning, all. Thank you for being here. This is a very important issue for all of us. I would like to mention something that is, water is very important and time is essence for us. I'm talking about Kurdistan and Iraq in general. There is a study, NASA did it, and they say in the Middle East, by year 2050, many countries, including Iraq, is going to be, including Kurdistan, is going to be desert. And the reason is, they say 70%, it's because of the wells that has been dug everywhere. 20% is for misuse. And I thought it's more, but that is the study says. So in Kurdistan especially, we have been digging wells and using it for agriculture. This should change. This is ridiculous. This water is more important maybe than oil. Soon we might find out this is going to happen. And it might be even more expensive, even by now.
It is now.
It is now. See?
A liter of water is...
It's more expensive than...
A liter of gasoline, so...
Which country?
Yes.
Here.
So, talking about the dams, that I agree, for environmental point of view, it's not a good idea. But in Kurdistan, I think we need to have smaller dams, not the dams that you are talking about, and using it. It is like harvesting water and using it for the agriculture that we are having, which is also not managed well. It is like locals, and it is we need to have a good management, even for the one that they do for themselves. Like there are so many orchards that has been established, and they use water from the wells. I think this should not be the case. So I am with having some dams, but it has to be managed. I don't know if it's a comment or a question.
Well, it brings up a number of issues that have been touched upon today, of Andrea's comments about the importance of good data and understanding what the situation is, and NASA's data and other people's data, Swillery's data collection. Swillery's current project has been able to provide the most comprehensive understanding of the water situation, the hydrological regime, water usage, because without that data, you don't know how to move forward. You don't know how to manage that water unless you know what's going on. So that's an excellent point. And then, of course, it also touches on Mukhtar's point, which he maybe would want to talk about the current disjointed, fractured management and regulation of things like wells and of our water that needs to change. Mukhtar, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, I give an example of the Khewata Dam, which is planned, is going ahead. Now, Dukan Sat depends on Khewata's inflow, and it produces much of electricity for the region. Now, you're diverting much of the water to Suleimaniya's drinking habit, which is 700 liters per person per day, twice as much as Paris and 3 times as much as Berlin, for example, water usage in the city. Now, what we are asking for, that in a valley you're building 3 dams, like a cascade of dams are built, without an integrated plan. You don't have an environmental impact assessment for the dams of what is going to be their effect on downstream.
Right, okay.
And the other important issue is, in future, Iraq, rest of Iraq is also there downstream to Kurdistan. You need to sort out the water allocation downstream of these rivers. So really it will be a big internal problem, as Andrea has suggested as well.
Okay, great. So I'd like to
integrated planning. This is what I'm asking.
Leave room for a few more questions. Well, let's go a few rows back, and then we'll bring it back to the front. Sorry. To this gentleman right here.
Good morning to you. This is Dr. Dilan Majid Rustam from Koi University. Just referring to a 2,000 years old saying from a Greek philosopher, he says, the law is the will of the strongest. Coming to you, Dr. Azzam, about the law, and we shouldn't spend our time on it. So at the end, it will be just the will of the strongest. I'm coming to the questions of the Kurds in this issue, and I remember reading an article in 1996 about drowning the Kurdish heritage. It was a campaign about Hassan Cave dam building in Turkey, and we used to do a demonstration against that dam with the Swiss company and Turkish companies, let's say, cooperation. What we come to the speech yesterday about the borders among the countries in Middle East that become borderless, but we are coming to the question, what will be the role of the Kurds when the water is sourcing from the Kurdish land anywhere you look at it, whether it's from Iran, whether it's from Turkey, whether it's from Iraq or Syria, the water source of the Middle East coming up from the Kurdish land. Are we, as a Kurds, investing our time on the oil in the right direction, do you think? Thank you.
Thank you. Any takers?
Well, I mean, I also asked the question yesterday about the Greater Kurdistan. We are not talking about the Greater Kurdistan because that is not a reality. It's not on the map. At the moment, the Kurdish regional government or the Kurdistan region of Iraq is on the map, and therefore that is why we are concentrating on the Kurdistan region. Well, the future, yes, of course, yes. I mean,
okay. Well, yeah. Sorry. Are you? Are you? Was that an answer? I couldn't really hear. Yes.
I mean,
Azzam, would you like to jump in?
I mean, unfortunately, the Greater Kurdistan is yet to happen. I mean, Hassan Cave. You know what we did for Hassan in 2008? Dinsha Iraq participated through BirdLife International to try to stop. Actually, we did stop the German funding. It was German, Swiss, and Austrian, and we actually succeeded in cutting off the funding for Aliso Dam. We celebrated. Unfortunately, we won a battle, but we lost the war because meanwhile Turkey went around and got funding and continued building, and it's going to be finished this summer. They're going to be filling it. In fact, last April, was it September? We did a flotilla from Hassan Cave all the way to the marshes to try to demonstrate the connectivity of the Tigris for the region.
And sorry, I'm going to have to cut you short because I'd really like to take at least one more question. Let's go back here to the gentleman right here.
Over there.
Mike, please.
The Minister of Water Resources of Kurdistan wants to ask a question. Former Minister.
Sorry, I'm completely blind to this side. I'm so sorry. If maybe he's quick and you're quick, we can have...
It is. It's a quick question. Fanar Haddad, Middle East Institute, Singapore. Forgive my ignorance. Quick question. I wanted to know if anyone can point to a successful example of multilateral management of shared water resources.
Danube and Nile.
Great, next question.
The Nile you'd point to as a successful one?
Well, it was successful for a while, and it will be it'll just continue.
Let's stick with Europe.
Danube, great.
And therefore, we need a unified trading bloc, because the Nile doesn't have it. Europe has it. So we need a borderless Middle East so that we don't have future problems.
Don't add on. We were so short and pithy. Mike, over here, please. And I really do think this will have to be the last question.
Thank you very much. Can I speak my language, Kurdish, please?
Also talking several times.
Thank you. برزان زور بکلک بو او دیبتی جمان لیبو من مویشتیک بلیم با برادران.
Okay, this is probably to Mukhtar.
I can talk English. Don't worry. Don't worry, Mr. Azzam.
We're just looking around.
About the water resource management, we always talk about the Turkey, Iran, Syrian project who affected the Iraq and Kurdistan region negatively. But I would like to highlight the importance of the integrated water resource management inside the Kurdistan region and Iraq. We didn't do what's supposed to do in our region and Iraq. We didn't put the water as the first or second priority to this moment in Iraq and Kurdistan region.
Right.
We don't have water law. We don't have any water pricing. We don't have any integrated, not only water resource management, our natural resource management. And I ask you to ask the politicians to pay attention to the water as a first priority from now and up. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry if I know everyone's going to be so angry with me, but one last question if it's very, very quick. Okay, he's given up. All right. Thank you so much. Unless you have last thoughts.
Maybe just a last thought over this statement. So for the water resources management, so as you heard, it's being done. Priority is being put on water. But most importantly, very recently, we started discussions with the central government to actually do a serious strategy for reforming the legislation and the institutional components of the water sector. So hopefully, with all of this in place, then it comes to implementations, obviously, very seriously, in achieving whatever goals you are discussing here, which is critical. So that's to let you know that this is happening. So it's hopefully will happen.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much.